The word escaped Callum Ray's lips in front of 300 employees, a row of television cameras, and the entire executive board. He had not planned it. He had not even realized what he had said until the conversations around him suddenly stopped. Beneath the bright midday sun, Callum reached for the billionaire CEO's hand as she stepped backward toward the path of a moving delivery van and shouted, "Baby, watch out." He pulled her against his chest just as the van rolled past, missing her by inches. For one breathless moment, Maris Holloway remained in his arms, her palms pressed against his faded work shirt, her usually unshakable expression softened by something Callum had never seen before. Then, while everyone stared, she leaned closer and whispered, "You finally said it." Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echoes of Hope if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that can change an ordinary life forever. Callum had spent most of the previous 6 years teaching himself not to need anyone. At 36, he was raising his 8-year-old daughter, Juniper, alone in a modest apartment above a closed bakery on the eastern side of the city. The apartment had narrow windows, creaking floors, and a kitchen ceiling that leaked whenever the rain lasted longer than an hour, but Callum made it feel like a home. He taped Juniper's paintings over the water stains, built her a bookshelf from discarded wooden crates, and woke before sunrise every morning to shape her sandwiches into stars because she once told him ordinary sandwiches tasted lonely. Juniper's mother had left when the child was barely 2, promising she needed a few weeks to find herself. Those weeks had stretched into years of unanswered messages, returned birthday cards, and silence. Callum never spoke badly of her. He simply carried the weight she had abandoned. He worked as the building operations supervisor at Holloway Meridian, one of the largest medical technology companies in the country. The company occupied a shining glass tower where sunlight poured through enormous windows and reflected from polished floors so clean that Callum sometimes felt his worn shoes did not belong on them. His job was to keep everything running while remaining nearly invisible. He repaired conference room screens before important presentations, replaced broken locks, inspected emergency systems, calmed angry vendors, and knew which elevators made strange noises before anyone else noticed. He arrived before most executives and left after the evening cleaning crews, yet his name rarely appeared in reports unless something went wrong. Maris Holloway, the company's founder and chief executive, lived in a world that seemed impossibly distant from his. At 40, she controlled an empire valued in the billions. Her face appeared on magazine covers, business programs, and enormous advertisements in airports. People described her as brilliant, disciplined, intimidating, and impossible to impress. She wore tailored suits, spoke with careful precision, and moved through the headquarters surrounded by assistants, lawyers, and security personnel. Employees lowered their voices when she entered a room. Some admired her. Others feared her. Almost no one believed she could be lonely. Callum first saw the woman behind the title on a bright Tuesday morning when Juniper's school unexpectedly closed because of a burst water pipe. He could not afford to miss a shift, and the neighbor who occasionally watched Juniper had gone to visit her sister. With no other choice, Callum brought his daughter to work. He set her up in a quiet maintenance office with coloring pencils, snacks, and strict instructions not to wander. For 3 hours, everything went smoothly. Then Juniper decided that the gray hallway outside the executive floor looked sad and placed small paper flowers along the wall to make it happier. Maris found her kneeling beside the elevator, carefully taping a purple paper flower near the baseboard. Callum returned at that exact moment, carrying a toolbox and feeling his stomach drop. He hurried forward, apologizing and expecting a formal complaint. Instead, Maris crouched beside Juniper in her expensive cream suit and asked why the flower had no leaves. Juniper explained that flowers did not need leaves when they grew in lonely places. Something shifted in Maris's face. She remained silent for several seconds before helping Juniper cut 2 green leaves from a spare sheet of paper. When Callum tried to remove the decorations later, Maris instructed him to leave them there. After that day, she began noticing him. At first, the changes were small. She greeted him by name instead of calling him facilities. She asked whether Juniper's school had reopened. She paused beside him when he repaired a light in the executive corridor and asked why he always worked through lunch. Callum answered carefully, aware that even a casual conversation with the CEO attracted attention. He never wanted anyone to think he was using Juniper to gain favor. He had survived too long on his own to accept pity disguised as generosity. Maris, however, was not offering pity. She was drawn to the steadiness in him. Everyone around her wanted something: a promotion, an investment, a recommendation, access to her influence. Callum wanted only enough overtime to cover Juniper's school expenses and enough time at night to read her a story before she fell asleep. He spoke to Maris respectfully but never fearfully. When he disagreed, he did so without performance. When she was wrong, he told her privately and calmly. When she thanked him, he never tried to extend the conversation. Their lives began crossing more often during a company project to open free daytime health clinics in underserved neighborhoods. Callum had suggested using an abandoned community center near his apartment after seeing families wait for hours at an overcrowded public hospital. His idea traveled through several managers before reaching Maris, stripped of his name. She later discovered the proposal had come from him and asked him to help inspect the building. Callum assumed she would send a representative, but at 9 the following morning, a black car stopped outside the center and Maris stepped onto the cracked pavement wearing practical shoes and carrying her own folder. They spent the entire day walking through dusty rooms flooded with sunlight. Callum showed her where examination rooms could be built, where plumbing needed replacement, and how the old courtyard could become a safe waiting area for children. Maris listened, asked thoughtful questions, and wrote down every detail. Around noon, Juniper arrived with Callum's elderly neighbor, who had agreed to watch her nearby. She brought 3 homemade sandwiches and insisted Maris take one. Sitting together on the front steps, with traffic passing and warm daylight covering the street, Maris ate a slightly crushed cheese sandwich from a paper bag. It was the first meal she had shared with people who did not care how much money she possessed in longer than she could remember. As the clinic project grew, so did the quiet bond between them. Maris learned that Callum drank coffee only after it had gone cold because he was always interrupted. Callum learned that she hated elevators with mirrored walls because they reminded her of hospital corridors from her childhood. Maris discovered that Juniper wanted to become an architect and build houses where no one felt temporary. Callum discovered that Maris had lost her younger brother to a treatable illness when they were teenagers, and that grief had inspired the company she later built. Her ambition was not born from greed. It came from the belief that money and technology should prevent other families from experiencing the helplessness that had destroyed hers. Yet the difference between their worlds remained impossible to ignore. Callum heard employees gossip whenever Maris stopped to speak with him. He noticed the way senior managers watched them, calculating what his presence might mean. One afternoon, a board member named Everett Sloan cornered Callum beside the loading dock and warned him that friendly attention from powerful people was rarely permanent. Everett suggested that Maris enjoyed collecting inspirational stories and would eventually move on to another cause. Callum pretended the words did not matter, but they followed him home. That evening, Juniper found him sitting at the kitchen table after sunset, staring at an unpaid electricity bill. The clinic project had required extra travel, but a payroll error had delayed his overtime payment. Callum had enough money for rent or Juniper's upcoming school trip, but not both. He planned to cancel the trip and tell her the school had changed the date. Juniper, however, understood more than he realized. She quietly placed her small savings jar beside him and said the coins were for emergencies. Callum turned away because he could not bear to let her see him cry. The next morning, Maris noticed that he was quieter. She asked whether something was wrong, but Callum insisted he was only tired. Later that day, she learned about the payroll error from the operations department. She could have simply ordered a large bonus, but she knew he would see it as charity. Instead, she demanded a company-wide payroll review and discovered that dozens of hourly employees had experienced similar delays. By sunset, the missing wages had been deposited into every affected worker's account, along with compensation for the error. Callum realized what she had done. She had protected his dignity by helping everyone. His feelings for her became harder to deny after that. They were not built from her beauty, wealth, or status. They came from the way she listened to Juniper's endless ideas. They came from the afternoon she sat on the floor of the clinic and helped volunteers assemble children's chairs. They came from the quiet sadness in her eyes whenever families left together. Callum sensed that beneath her confidence lived a woman who had spent years being admired but rarely known. Maris had feelings of her own, though she carried them behind a practiced expression. Callum made her feel safe in a way no security team ever had. He did not flatter her. He noticed when she had skipped lunch, when meetings exhausted her, and when the pressure of leadership left her hands trembling beneath the table. Once, after a difficult board meeting, he placed a cup of cold coffee beside her without a word because he remembered she had begun drinking it that way after spending so much time around him. She had smiled for the rest of the afternoon. The clinic's South opening ceremony took place on a clear Saturday morning. Hundreds of employees, local families, reporters, and city officials gathered in the renovated courtyard. Sunlight shone across fresh white walls, young trees, and colorful murals designed by children from the neighborhood. Juniper stood near the entrance wearing a yellow dress and proudly showing visitors the reading corner she had helped decorate. Callum wore his best shirt, though the cuffs were slightly frayed. He remained near the technical equipment, determined to stay out of photographs. Maris arrived shortly before the ceremony began. She wore a pale blue suit and looked less like a distant billionaire than the woman who had once eaten a crushed sandwich on the building's steps. During her speech, she surprised everyone by calling Callum to the stage. She explained that the clinic existed because one employee had seen a neglected building and imagined it filled with hope. The crowd applauded, but Callum felt exposed rather than proud. Everett's warning returned to him. He wondered whether he had become part of the company's public image. After the speech, he moved away from the stage and began checking cables. Maris followed, confused by his sudden distance. She asked why he could not accept being recognized for something meaningful. Callum finally admitted that he did not know where he belonged in her life. He told her that one day she treated him like a partner and the next he remembered she could buy the entire block where he lived without noticing the cost. He confessed that Juniper had begun asking whether Maris would come for dinner again. He could not allow his daughter to become attached to someone who might disappear. Maris's eyes filled with pain, but before she could respond, a group of reporters approached. Cameras turned toward them. A delivery van entered the courtyard behind Maris, carrying the final medical equipment. The driver slowed, but Maris stepped backward without seeing it. Callum saw the van immediately. He reached for her hand and shouted, "Baby, watch out." He pulled her forward, and the van passed behind her. The courtyard fell silent. Callum's heart pounded as he realized what he had called her. It was the name he used when Juniper was frightened, the word that belonged to tenderness and protection, the word he had forbidden himself from thinking whenever Maris stood close. She remained against his chest, looking up at him as though the hundreds of people around them had vanished. Then she whispered, "You finally said it." Callum expected embarrassment to follow. Instead, Maris took his hand and led him away from the cameras into the clinic's quiet reading room. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, painting warm rectangles across the floor. She told him she had spent months waiting for him to stop treating his feelings like something shameful. She admitted that she was afraid too. She had built a life where everyone could be replaced because replacement felt safer than loss. Callum and Juniper had become the first people she could not imagine walking away from. Callum told her love was not a business agreement. He could not promise perfection, and he would not let money become the foundation of their relationship. Maris answered that she did not need perfection. She needed mornings where someone noticed whether she had eaten, afternoons where Juniper left paper flowers in serious hallways, and a home where she was not valued for the company attached to her name. Their relationship did not instantly become easy. Callum continued working, refusing a sudden executive position he had not earned. Maris respected that choice and promoted him only months later, after he completed professional training and proved himself through an open selection process. Gossip followed them, but they faced it together. Juniper struggled at first with the fear that Maris might leave like her mother had. Maris did not make grand promises. She simply kept showing up. She came to school presentations in the middle of crowded weekdays. She helped Juniper build a model bridge at the kitchen table. She learned how to shape sandwiches into stars, though hers often looked like broken clouds. Slowly, Juniper stopped asking how long she would stay. A year after the clinic opened, Callum brought Maris back to its courtyard on another bright Saturday morning. Families filled the waiting area, children read books beneath the young trees, and sunlight reflected from the windows. There were no cameras or executives, only Juniper hiding nearby with a paper flower in her hands. Callum told Maris that he once believed love belonged to people with easier lives. She had taught him that love did not arrive when every problem disappeared. Sometimes it arrived in the middle of unpaid bills, exhausting workdays, old fears, and uncertain futures, asking only for the courage to be accepted. He placed a simple ring in her palm. Before he could finish asking, Maris wrapped her arms around him and said yes. Juniper ran toward them, laughing so hard that her paper flower slipped from her hand. Callum caught it before it touched the ground. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who still believes love can find us after disappointment, and subscribe to Echoes of Hope. Your comments and support allow more stories of kindness, healing, and second chances to reach people who may desperately need them. Special request: comment "Love shows up" if you believe the right person will not only promise to stay, but will prove it through their actions. Months later, on the morning of their small courtyard wedding, Maris stood beneath the trees outside the clinic as Juniper adjusted the paper flowers woven into her veil. Callum walked toward them through the golden daylight, no longer feeling like a man who did not belong in her world. Maris had never needed him to become wealthy, powerful, or impressive. She had only needed him to stop running from the truth inside his heart. When he reached her, she smiled and quietly asked whether he remembered the first time he called her baby. Callum laughed, took her hands, and told her it had been an accident. Maris shook her head as the sunlight warmed their faces. She told him that sometimes an accident was simply the heart telling the truth before fear could stop it. And surrounded by the people whose lives their clinic had changed, the single father and the billionaire CEO began a new life together, not because one had rescued the other, but because they had taught each other that real love was not measured by wealth, status, or perfect circumstances. It was measured by who stayed, who listened, and who reached for your hand before you stepped into danger.